I would like to welcome you all to this webinar, which is part of our ongoing series exploring social pedagogical concepts during turbulent times. We're delighted to focus in this particular webinar on Lifespace as an interesting concept that I think holds a lot of possibilities and is probably worth exploring, given that the importance of the life space has clearly changed, particularly during lockdown, when people weren't really allowed to venture much further anyway. So we thought it'd be an interesting time to review what do we make of the concept right now, in terms of how relevant is it for practice, and yeah, what are our insights, what are our experiences around that. So I'm delighted to be joined by my colleague Alex Priver from ThemPra, by Matthew McFadzean from Pebbles Care, and by George Evans and his colleague Elizabeth from the Camphill Community in Beannachar, to help us explore how we can use everyday activities to develop meaningful relationships and everything else connected to Lifespace. And of course, in terms of the structure, we're really keen to hear from you. So you'll briefly hear a little bit about the concept of Lifespace from myself, and then we'll start the fishbowl discussion with Matthew and George and Alex, before we then have some time for a bit of a wider exploration with you all, to hear about your experiences and any ways in which you may have been using the concept, or might feel like this is practice relevant because of ABC. And hopefully we'll have a chance to kind of wrap up the webinar just before 11 with some key learning points for practice. So with that being said, I'd just like to give you a quick insight into Lifespace as a concept. So it's been developed very much within a residential childcare context in particular, in recognition that there is therapeutic benefit that happens when people live together, when young people live together, and we interact with them as part of their everyday life. So it's about how we can use daily life events in a therapeutic, and I would argue in an educational way as well. So how can we make sure that things like doing the washing up or preparing a meal isn't just a chore, but how can we make sure that this is actually an enjoyable activity that we do together, where we can learn together, where we can be with each other, sort of nurture the values that are important to us, develop relationships, and spend meaningful time with each other. It's very much based on the idea that if we want to really meaningfully support people, that support must be embedded within people's actual life. So it's not about the 1 hour of therapy that people might have to go to once a week or something like that. That might be important, but actually it's just as important that we support people in their actual life world, in their home. Particularly within residential care, I think it is based on recognition that what you might think of as your workplace is actually the home of the young people or the adults that live there. So it kind of changes this idea of, oh, we're just here to do our work, to do our shift, but actually we're here because we're in that person's life space, we're in that person's home. And how can we make sure that we're kind of mindful of that? Another important aspect is this notion of milieu. So that sense of how can we actually create both a physical life space, a physical environment that gives people the sense of being at home, of this being their home, and how can we also kind of create the emotional environment for that? So it's the focus on both the feel and the sensory impact of the physical life space. I'm sure that Matthew and George will talk a lot more about that, particularly because Camphill Communities are really brilliant at kind of really looking at both how can we create the kind of culture of togetherness, how can we actively nurture that, and how can we create an environment that feels visually appealing and really stimulates people's senses and gives that real sense of an oasis of kind of being home. But equally, it's simple things. Like I remember when we were visiting a Danish children's home once, the home's manager was talking about sort of making sure that when the kids come home from school, that there's always the smell of freshly baked bread, because that's something that they wanted the kids to associate with kind of coming home and just feeling at home. So it's stuff like that that's really important in Lifespace. It is about kind of getting away from focusing just on the one-to-one relationship and looking at how can we actually work with groups or with the family. So how can we actually focus on the microcosm around an individual rather than just on the individual? How can we nurture those relationships as well? And how can we do that through different rhythms and rituals? How can we make sure that routines aren't just tedious things, but how can we make them a bit more meaningful? How can we create meaningful moments in the everyday, if you want? Conceptually, I think there's also links to sort of key traditions in social pedagogy in Germany, which are Alltagsorientierung, so the everyday orientation, as well as Lebensweltorientierung, which is about sort of orientation towards people's life worlds and really kind of trying to understand what their world looks like and what we can do on an everyday basis to support them there. So with this being said, I will stop the screen share and I will introduce you now to Matthew McFadzean, who's been working in residential care for a long time, even though he looks very young, and has lots of experience and yeah, lots of insights into how to use Lifespace in a children's home. So Matthew, over to you.
Thank you very much. I'd like to start by saying that when I came into residential care, there was a real focus on moving away from the old big dumping grounds, Tracy Beaker style homes where you had, you know, loads and loads of kids piled into a home and a few staff looking after them. And that dumping ground idea was sort of, it was kind of apparent in the way that care homes were. So we in Britain had seriously made a huge move towards turning care homes into family homes and trying to recreate the family environment. So, and that was seen as an absolute vital part of, you know, children's care, you know, who were in residential care homes. However, having said that, I got the opportunity to go to Denmark in 2012 to spend some time in working with Danish social pedagogues. And I went to a children's care home called Remarksvange in Copenhagen. And it was a real shock to me because it was an industrial unit in an industrial estate. And looking at it, I thought, this isn't a kid's home. How can this be a kid's? How can this provide, you know, good care for kids? But when we went inside, it was so much more than just the physical bricks and, well, in those cases, breeze blocks of a, you know, industrial unit. It was very clearly the kids' home. You could see the routines, you could see the comfort, you could see the way the kids had made it their home. And that really knocked my idea of what, you know, what we should be putting in for, you know, how we should be viewing the kids' care home. And it made me explore it. And, you know, the reality is that not everybody wants to recreate a family home, the family environment, because for them that's been difficult. So I was left with this sort of confusion about how, you know, we're saying that we have to have kids' care homes have to be this idyllic sort of surroundings with the roses around the door and everything, you know, recreating the family home. And yet here were these people in Denmark that were, the kids and the staff were so connected, and so the relationships they had were so strong. They were clearly happy in their surroundings. They weren't being industrially, you know, stored. It wasn't like that. And then, you know, since then, I've come back and I've looked at it, and there's so many interesting things that, you know, that go, we have to go beyond the idea that it's the actual physical surroundings that create the life space. It's what we do within the space within the walls, the space within the area that we're in, not the actual walls that, you know, that we build up on the roof above the head to provide that basic need for shelter and warmth. You know, and I've looked at a couple of situations with homes where, you know, we had, you know, on one hand, we've got the kids who are enthusiastic, energized in their own home, and it's very much their own home. They've made it theirs. And then in another care home, you know, where I went in, the kids were withdrawn and not engaging in any way. They were spending all their time in the room. You know, you would think that the home that was the, you know, the idyllic home would be the one where everyone was engaged, but it wasn't. It was actually the industrial setting of Remarksvänge where everyone was engaged. Whereas this beautiful home with wonderful gardens and, you know, it was, you know, a really, really exclusive environment. There was no engagement with the staff and the kids. There was no sense that this was the kids' home. It was just a place where they were being kept. So Lifespace has to be much more than looking at what the actual physical surroundings are. It's about what happens within those physical surroundings, the space where the life happens. And so over the last year and a bit since the lockdown started at the end of March last year, I've been looking at the way that children have been, you know, been living with staff members, and it's very clear that, especially during this difficult time of lockdown, that finding and maintaining common third connections with staff and young people is absolutely essential, because, you know, people are going to have been basically placed together, and there's no escape, there's no opportunity to go out. So that common third is hugely important, as has been the importance of gardens. You know, I was looking at, you know, one of the homes I've been looking at, you know, previously the garden had some games in it. It had, you know, it had a swimming pool, a paddling pool, but mostly the idea was when you came out the front door, you went through the garden to get to the gate, which is then taking people out to do activities elsewhere. And now that garden has become much more a part of the life space, rather than, you know, it just being something pretty that sort of decorated the outside of the house. And in the garden, in this particular garden, we've got kids with the staff. They've set up a vegetable garden, and they've been growing vegetables. They were growing them all through last summer and into the autumn. And last autumn, they actually, for the first time ever, harvested the apples in the, you know, there's several apple trees, and they actually harvested the apples and started distributing them around, making a more of a connection with people in the community. They converted a barn into an art studio, and the kids and the staff did it together. And it was very much, you know, when you go there, it's very much a sense that that life space is owned, and it's not just within the home. It's all the way out throughout the garden as well, and that everywhere you go, there's a sense of a connection that people have, that it's got meaning for them. Within Pebbles Care, we talk about, in the Lifespace perspective, we talk about the other 23 hours as a part of, you know, a therapeutic approach to caring for kids, where it's all very well for kids going for, you know, therapeutic support with a therapist 1 hour a week or 1 hour a month or whatever. But what happens in the rest of the time is where the real work happens, where the real growth and change happens. And that's everything. It's not just the big grandiose events. It's those little moments that make the huge difference over time. There's a saying that I really appreciate, and it's the idea that my persistence will overcome your resistance. And that is the idea that if you try to do something good for someone over time, they may reject it in the beginning, but if you keep doing it gradually over and over and over again, eventually it becomes something that they come to accept and be able to cope with. And that, you know, that other 23 hours within the life space is where all the magic happens. It's where the relationships are formed, and it's where the memories are created. And just as a final thing, I would just like to say that, you know, this specific house, Just before I arrived in this company, the manager had decided that the central hall, there was a big hall in the middle of the house, and it was the place where everyone gathered. It was the community hub. And they decided that the sofas were rubbish and they weren't going to keep them. So they got rid of them, but they didn't replace them. And what happened is the kids had just stopped gathering there, and they were back in the rooms, and there was no connection. And it was a real sense of loss that the kids were feeling, because that hub had been taken away from their life, that place where everybody gathered, everyone connected. And so we started sitting on the floor in that room, in that hallway, and the kids would then come out of the rooms and start sitting on the floor as well. And then we brought back in the old battered sofas, and then, you know, even though they looked tatty, the kids had the sofas, and the kids were lounging on the sofas, we were lying on the floor. And then we started talking about decorating the room, and the room got decorated, and it became the hub again. It became that center where everybody connected. And if we're going to create Lifespace, we have to have that sense of connection. Lifespace is where we connect, not where we should be, you know. And if we don't have that connection, we have isolation. And especially during lockdown, isolation has been a huge, significant issue for people around the world. And nowhere more than in care homes do we need to combat isolation and ensure that people have that connection with their fellow human beings.
Yeah. Absolutely. Thanks very much, Matthew. And I think it's really fascinating in terms of how you talk about sort of the importance of ownership as well. So the connection both to the place, because it's something that's been co-created, co-developed, and the people that make the place a home. So that's really, really fantastic. Thanks. I'm gonna go over to Aberdeen, to George and his colleague Elizabeth, who are in the most idyllic setting really that we've had. Anybody, and I'm really impressed with that background, which is not actually just it's not a virtual background at all. But this is part of what's important in Camphill, both in terms of the physical place and the feel of it, but also about how you actually fill that place with love and care and togetherness. So George, over to you. Tell us a bit more about Lifespace at Camphill and what it means.
Thank you, Gabriel. So Beannachar is a Campbell community. It's part of a wider movement of similar communities. And the Campbell movement started 80 years ago, so it's been around quite a long time, but the core ideas are much the same. We have households that we're trying to create true homes for the people we support. In our case, we support young adults from around 18 to 30 with various learning disabilities. And then in most Camphill communities, and Beannachar is typical in this sense, we're within a wider estate. And so it's not just the homes we have, but then we have the grounds around us, some of which you can see through the windows behind me. And there's a real focus on creating that physical environment. So, I mean, as Matthew has highlighted, the physical environment is not enough on its own, but it can help. If you get the environment right, that can help to get those relationships developing in the way Matthew said about that shared gathering space in a home. In a way, you need to make these environments where you can bring people together in the shared life space. So how do we do that? So if you drive into our estate, you'll see field surrounds, and we have a little farm. with some animals, and that's always when people come. First of all, that's often one of the first things that they seek out. So it's a welcoming space where people want to be. And then as you go into the core of the community, we have 4 households, and they're arranged. There's a large old building which has 2 houses in, and then we have 2 newer buildings. And the newer ones have been built in a circle around like a central grass area. So it creates this shared space within the middle of the community. So there's a real focus on the whole layout, and that includes making sure, that we have flowers around and generally that it feels cared for. And when you create that cared for feeling, that helps the people we're working with and supporting to also feel cared for. They're not dumped here. They're living here and being nurtured within the setting. As you come into a house, you'll see we have usually warmer colors downstairs to create this sense of warmth, and a secure space where people can relax and gather. And then if you go upstairs, you have the bedrooms of the young adults here, and those are much more individual. People decorate them depending on how they want them. So that's their private living space, and then we have the shared living area where we come together. So that links with the concept that Gabriel said about earlier, the milieu, which is where we consciously use the whole environment to support people's development. We have quite a not completely unique model in our care, in that most of our care workers are international volunteers that come and actually live within the homes alongside the young adults we're supporting. So it truly is shared living. It is a workplace too. We have employees who come in from outside, and they're very important too because they give that continuity. But I think it really helps that the core of people supporting the young adults are a similar age. That creates quite natural relationships, and also living here. So it really is a home, and it prevents it accidentally not becoming that, because in a way that the young volunteers maybe are more able to argue their cases than some of our young adults owing to communication difficulties, etc. So that really helps to keep it living. The other thing we traditionally use a lot is rituals and routines, and that includes at meal times we always have a candle in the center of the table, and we light that at the beginning of the meal, and that's the kind of sign that's the start of the meal time. And at the end, we say thank you for the meal, and we take it in turns, and someone puts the candle out, and we say good morning after breakfast or good afternoon after lunch, and that's the sign that meal's finished. So it structures the living environment, not just physically but also in time, and that gives a real rhythm to the days. And over the year we celebrate various festivals, so that creates a rhythm right through the year, which over time builds up. And for a resident who's been here several years, there's that real feeling that there's a structure they're part of, and it also creates a sense of belonging, because there'll be, for example, recently we had the Ascension Walk, which is where we walk up a big hill, have a picnic, and we do that every year. And people really look forward to that. So it gives us sense, yeah, I'm part of Beannachar, and this is what we do. Yeah, thinking about recently with COVID and lockdown, we've been quite lucky. We have been affected in that we've had to separate into smaller bubbles within the community. So for example, one of our kind of rituals is to have a morning gathering. And previously that was everyone within the community every morning. But we've had to do that within our houses rather than in a larger group. But that's actually been quite interesting, because it created more freedom to really create that more together. So it really has come to feel more everyone's meeting, whereas at times in the past it felt a bit more like something we came to and wasn't always natural. So as Matthew was saying, it's really important that the people we're supporting really feel that they're contributing to creating the Lifespace. So it's important that we always remember to keep it real and keep it connected with who we're living and supporting. Yeah, I could say more, but I think that's maybe enough.
That is already really rich, and I think sort of from my experience of visiting various Camphill communities, there's something about sort of those rhythms that also help connect people to nature. So you know, sort of thinking about the moon cycle and the 4 seasons, and how some of the festivals that you celebrate are really very closely linked to that, so that people get that sense of not just being part of Camphill, but actually being part of a whole ecosystem that really roots us in the place and
yeah, maybe I could give,
as an organism in the world, in the cosmos.
yeah, maybe I could give one example of that briefly. So another festival we celebrate is Condiments, and what we do is very early spring, when very little is starting to grow, is we make little candles that we actually put in the earth. And light, so we bring light and warmth back into the earth. And this is looking ahead to that new life and growth that will come out of the earth as we go into the new year. So yeah, as you said, it's really connecting to the environment and to the nature around us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Elizabeth, is there anything you wanted to add?
Actually, I'm afraid Elizabeth didn't manage to join me. She was hoping to, but I have Maria here. Who's,
Oh, hi, Maria. Sorry.
yeah.
I would, no, I can't say I'm the new Elizabeth. I can only say that I am attempting to stand on Elizabeth's shoulders, just like giants, so I can see further.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Maria. Is there anything you wanted to add? Anything that you want to highlight around Lifespace?
No, not at this point. I think I've just been here for 8 months, so 9 months. So yeah, I value the importance of Lifespace and creating that. I notice how well it works here and how have done in other places. Yeah, I just really value it. I think it's really important, and I'm struck by how co-workers or any co-worker, member of staff is coming in, and for them that might also be new for them, what we create here. So it's enabling and enriching a co-worker or a member of staff, you know, to know why we do that and to understand why, so they experientially, but to really understand in their core why that happens, because actually they might not have experienced that in their own life space. So I think there's something important in that as well. Yeah,
and it's a beautiful thing when workers come to their workplace and feel like actually this is home for us as well. It just sends a really important message. It reminds me of that Danish homes manager I mentioned earlier, who was once asked by a child, like, where do you actually go to work? So it just felt like he was there. This was his home as well, and the kids couldn't quite understand. Where was his workplace really? But,
that would be that. In that term, that would be the kind of question: can we create an environment where it doesn't feel like care work, but being like the closest to the family, or whatever setting? I think it's could be a guiding question. I think a foster child on a BBC documentary said that it is you've done a good job, you've worked well when it doesn't feel like work for us. Well, that's actually a really good guide for any kind of care settings. Oh, sorry, barging in now.
No, absolutely. I was going to hand over to you anyway, Alex. Because I think there's clearly something where Lifespace has huge applicability for residential settings, whether that's residential childcare or care homes for people with disabilities or older people. I'm also really interested in how we can extend that the key points in that concept to other settings. So how can we make sure that, for instance, in social work settings, that we're more consciously working within the everyday, working within people's life space, even if that's not in an environment that we necessarily control or visit all the time. So that's why I thought I'd bring in my colleague Alex, who's got lots of experience in that particular domain. So over to you, Alex.
Yeah, thank you. I think the last point was really important, that we can explain what we're doing. So the other way around, if we have a concept which then we can explain other people what we're doing, we make our work professional. It's not just caring for children, giving them shelter and food. It makes watching telly, going for a football match, having an enjoyable evening of a game night professional. And I think this is that being conscious about that we can set this life space. It's a true setting to work with. I think it must be interesting as well for the other part of the 24 hours. So there's maybe the therapeutic hour, but there's as well other contacts with people in the community, as we said, or social workers, etc. So how can we create any kind of moment together? Because if the everyday shapes us, then that's where we need to be in any kind of setting, at least for parts. So as a social worker, I was using Lifespace and the setting idea to meet the family, maybe on a bit more equal ground. So yes, there's benefits on having home visits, but there's as well huge benefits to go in a park or in the playground and create atmospheres where people don't feel like I'm watching through their cupboard and how clean the house is, but actually meet them as people and create such settings. For foster care I'm from Germany, one of our colleagues is from Denmark. So on the continent, there's a big drive that foster carers can actually prepare this life space for the birth family to learn and grow at the same time as the child. So it doesn't only so contact, if whenever it's possible, of course it takes place more in the life space, which means the family house, or birth family, or the foster family's house, and allowing so that normal activity like making a meal together, having a game night, doing homework together, become learning opportunities. How somebody who's maybe more experienced, like a foster mom, can, through showing, not through telling, provide a huge learning environment. And there are plenty of examples. I think the other one Matthew said about linking residential childcare in the community. That is a case for leaving and aftercare for so many settings. This is the community will be there for the kids after maybe professionals have left. So who is in the community? How can we again support the everyday building a community situations for young people? So how can we do that even more and even better? Because again, the big thing about loneliness and isolation. Yeah, so just a few examples. I have questions. I have some more.
Yeah, thanks very much. And I think there's lots of really good examples about like how can you for instance work with families. I know of several projects that would kind of create a separate environment for families to come to have a bit of a holiday, to experience that a different life space is possible for them as well, that they can, you know, with a bit more space, with being away from everyday problems, they can actually reimagine the relationships and change the relationships they have with them. So that kind of experience is really crucial. But what all of these models show is that this only works in the long term when you then also have support in the people's actual life space. So if you take someone out into an artificial environment, keep them there for a while, show them that, you know, you can be this family if you lived here with a bit more support, and think that's enough, then that won't work. What really works is when then there's also support later on in the actual, you know, physical life world of the family, within their home, within their social environment, because all of those things obviously shape people and shape the way we interact with others. So it is about sort of how can we create those connections between potentially different life spaces to really offer meaningful support for people. So very curious to hear a bit more from others who are part of the webinar. And I know we've got some people with lots of experience in here. So I'm very keen to open this up to anyone else who would like to either share your reflections just now on this, or share your experiences of having used the concept of life space. What does it look like in your practice or within your organization? And what's been perhaps the importance within lockdown? How has that changed your focus on life space? Would anyone like to unmute themselves?
We can reflect a little bit on something that Matthew was saying that I feel also in my practice very a challenge. Martin here, hello, also from Camphill, but in Northern Ireland. And one of the things Matthew was saying, this understanding that your workspace is someone else's home, that cannot be undervalued and estimated. That is so important and yet so difficult to achieve. And that's really where the practitioner development trainings need to say that very clearly. We have a natural inclination to feel when we are at work, to feel that we need to be doing work. And sometimes, especially when our boss is around, especially when our boss is a little bit where you need to tuck your shoulders in a little bit, we feel like sitting together with a young person that we are supporting or an adult and having a cup of tea and doing nothing is not doing our job. Sometimes we have that tendency, or just sitting in the garden in the sunshine and playing, or these things that are actually the most meaningful and important spaces to really share a life space are often, from a working perspective, seen or judged, or maybe they aren't, but we have the fear that someone does, as unproductive and not doing our job. So this awareness of really creating a homely environment, and to really almost encourage a conscious moment before one enters the door to really leave one's own clutter behind a little bit. In Camphill, some people live in the house, and then it becomes a bit more mixed and the life space is a bit more shared, but there's also a lot of transitions happening. So in really to guide this very, very consciously, you are working in someone's home, so you can start to live in your work. Don't see your work as work. Live it, enjoy it, and be there and focus on the relationships. And if the boss doesn't understand, then he or she has got some learning to do. Oops.
Thanks, Martin. Yeah, I think that's a really, really valuable point to make. It's about being with each other rather than doing lots of things. And I think there's also something about being able to role model that we have more than one home. You know, it's fine for me as a worker to have a home that I share with, you know, my kids and my family, whoever that might be. And at the same time, I can also have a home that is where I support the young people, and that there's no contradiction. That, you know, nobody says that you can only have one home, because, you know, for the young people, that's equally applicable. They will have the home where you support them, and they will have a home where, you know, they've grown up in, and there'll be different kind of feelings attached to them, different memories, but that doesn't mean that they need to choose one over the other in that sense. Matthew.
Yeah, just that really resonated what you said there, Martin. Really, it immediately reminded me of a conversation that we had in one of the care homes I worked in years and years ago, and it was about people feeling guilty about sitting and watching Coronation Street with one of the kids. And the reality was that that is just of equal value to any of the other things we do in our job. You know, it's not sitting around doing nothing, it's sharing a common experience. And it's the way that, you know, even just watching something as simple as a soap opera, the dramas that go on in it, they lead to conversations. They lead to an opportunity to explore what life means and about what different experiences are. And there is no, you know, people were feeling guilty about doing these little simple things that, you know, didn't look like work. But as Martin says, these are, you know, our work is about doing all these details, these little simple things that are just a part of what we consider as everyday life. We don't consider it work, but our job is about helping people to experience life, to build relationships, to share, to, you know, to learn and to grow. And we do that in the small things, not in the big dramatic grand things, which, you know, the big grand projects. It's the little details of life that help people to learn and grow. Nice one.
Yeah, thanks, Matthew. Any other experiences, insights? What does Lifespace mean at other organizations? Jane, lovely to see you again.
Hi, nice to see you. I'm about to start a new job where I'll be visiting, start tomorrow, children's homes as a regular monthly visitor who's there to look at the care, look at the children are safe. And this is an enriching conversation for me, retouching these ideas and thinking, when I go in, when I arrive, what is it that I'm looking for? And also the role is about supported staff and ideas. And I loved what Martin was saying about reminding staff about permission to be and what's important and how you spend time. So I don't think I have a lot to contribute in what I've seen, but it's enriching for me it's about my mind space as I go in, and ideas and the conversations I can have with young people and the staff about how they spend their time, what shift would look like to get an understanding how they approach the workspace and the life space. So really interesting and good to see some familiar faces. So yeah, thank you.
That sounds like
so you have now the task to create a monthly rhythm with some of the homes, a thing to look forward to, that you are coming.
Oh, thank you for that idea. Yeah.
No, because that would be what George said in terms of what rituals are there for, and instead of being maybe the dreaded, how could it be like we're looking forward to come? That would be amazing, Jane.
Yeah, that's what I want to be able to create, the
Yeah.
connection with everybody in that life space.
Yeah.
And you know, the idea of the phrase I keep using for the organisation is the critical friend, but it's also I'm going into the life space, so how I be the role model as well. So, and the idea of the monthly rhythm, yeah, the ritual, I like that. Thank you.
What an opportunity. Amazing. Come back and tell us.
Yeah, I will. Thank you.
Yes, please do. And I think
And hello, Karen, by the way, another face I recognise.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, and I think there is something really interesting about kind of when we have these conversations with each other. It kind of reveals something about kind of our conceptual understanding of what our work is about and how we are in the life space. That we're not just here with just no idea of why watching Coronation Street is important, but that we can actually explain why this is part of our work and why it's a crucial part. I think that's the thing that makes all the difference.
Alex, so I'm just going to go. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, no, I need to go, but I was struck by there was the slide at the beginning of two teddy bears, one hanging over the sofa and one hanging on the sofa. And I think that really sums up, because again, back to enabling or explaining or giving permission to staff that are coming in and of thinking this is a home, not for the guys, not a workplace. And so one of our new staff, senior staff, said to me, "Oh, is that okay, Maria, that one of the co-workers is lying on the sofa and one of the students is hanging out at the end of the sofa?" And I said, "Yeah, but it's their home. That's us together in a home." But it's being able to explain that again and give permission to new people and new staff, so that you, as you say, you're consciously saying, this is how we do things and this is why we do it. Because it's a scary place sometimes when you've come from that very professional, so-called professional managerial type care home or environment. It's to step into a home. But if we can keep reinforcing that for any staff, or any encounter and people that touch us, hopefully they can go out and do that elsewhere as well. Yeah. Which brings me to, I've just had the turbulent times of how to do cleaning in an infection control and COVID, and that we're going to be inspected on that. But now I have a good insight and inspired to do that differently and well together and in a fun way. So you see us out with our mops. Anyway, I'm going to go. Take care.
That's brilliant. Love it. Any other contributions from any of you? Anything that's kind of struck you? Anything that's reminded you of something that you're doing? Doreen, thanks for your chat message there. Would you like to say anything else about that? You're a student at Kingston University. How are you enjoying your course there?
Yeah, hi. My name is Doreen. I'm a social pedagogue student at Kingston University. Just finished first year, thank God, through this COVID and everything. Yes, I have really enjoyed today's program. The meaning is, with a little experience and what I've seen around in the society, that there's a lot of youth or young people at the moment facing so much social injustice. They're hardly able to explain themselves when something happens. By the time they're able to explain themselves or someone to understand them, decisions will be making against them already, and I don't think that is really fair on them. I'm a mother, I've got a teenage, so I think it's a vital responsibility when these children are in our hands, as those of you who work in a care home, make sure they're really safe and feel comfortable, and so they can explore more of their life just to be who they want to be. Some of them might, maybe there's so many reasons why they come to the care home. They might be able to go back to their families. And again, I think it's up to us to liaise with government professionals to make sure those families are come back together. There might be a really tiny little thing that those young people are not home. So the best thing the government can do is just to support that family, so they'll be able to have their young people back in the house. So that's what I've got to say. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. I think that's a really important point, in that, you know, we also need to work in the life space of those families, not just take the kids out and recreate a better life space for them somewhere else, because the reality is that most care leavers will go back to their families, and if nothing's changed for them in that life space, if they feel less ownership over it because they've spent less time there, then yeah, how's that supposed to help them in the future? So those are really important questions, and I like that you framed it around social justice as well. That's really crucial.
That reminds me of that quote, every child needs somebody to be crazy about them. So as well, somehow in the care setting, we need to allow this relationships that somebody trusts you and gives you to go and not let go. So there is a tension between the idea of professionalism and how to provide a nurturing and caring environment for the ones who are so vulnerable and grow up in all our care, for that matter, not just the residential staff, foster carers.
Absolutely. Thanks. Yeah, and I think there's that bit about social justice, like, you know, if you're in a children's home, chances are you'll have your own room, you'll have food on the table 3 times a day, you'll do lots of activities and sports and what have you. When you grow up in a family where, you know, there's no money, in an area that's socially just deprived, where you have to share a room with your parents or with 2 of your siblings and all of that, and where there's no food on the table regularly, then that's the life space that we need to be very mindful of trying to change for the better as well. That's, I think, what, you know, links to what Alex was saying there about, you know, this is our collective responsibility as society. Matthew.
Yeah, just something that Dorian, that you said there, that really reminded me of the importance of something, is that we have to, when children come into the care environment, into that, you know, before we even talk about how are we going to make that life space enriching for them, how are we going to do all these wonderful things, the very first thing we have to do is help them to establish a sense of safety in that environment. And if children don't feel safe, then it doesn't matter what else you're going to try and do. If they are feeling unsafe, they're never going to be able to take on any of those opportunities to develop and grow, because they're constantly thinking about survival. You know, and I'm specifically thinking of a young man who came into one of the care homes I look after just before Christmas time. And, you know, he'd come from a gang environment, so he was living constantly in fear of being stabbed or shot. And on that very basic level, that very simple thing, just helping him to feel safe enough to start making relationships and start finding common third activities with relationships with these carers. It took 5 months. It took 5 months to even develop that basic sense of safety. So in the life space, we have to create safety before we can do anything else.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point to almost end on. But before we let you all go, I'd like you to just post any key learning points for you from today's webinar. So just drop them in the chat so that we've got a bit of a record of what stands out for people with regards to the concept of life space and how it can be beneficial in practice. In the meantime, whilst you do that, may I express my deep gratitude to Matthew and George and Maria and Alex in particular for joining the Fishbowl and starting us off, and of course for all of you for joining our little webinar and contributing with your thoughts and insights. that's always really fantastic. Now, at the moment, we haven't yet scheduled in another webinar of the series, but I'm determined to keep it up. So we'll take a little summer break for now, and then we'll be back after the summer with more sessions. So I hope you'll join us. In the meantime, I should also mention that we are co-organizing an international online conference next month, which is why there won't be a webinar. There'll be loads and loads of other learning opportunities as part of that. It's on from the 22nd to 24th of June. It's all happening online. We're part of a whole range of different organizations that have come together to explore the theme of creating hope in dystopia, with some really fascinating keynote presentations, as well as lots of interesting shorter presentations from across the globe. So if you're interested in joining us, I will, you can find all the information on either our website or on socialpedagogy.org. As part of that, we're also hosting another network gathering of the Social Pedagogy Development Network, which is going to happen on the 23rd of June, and it's free to join. And we're also co-hosting a session on developing a global alliance for social pedagogy, to which you are all very warmly invited to come along as well. I will send all of that in an email as well, in case you're interested, and it would be amazing to see you all again then, if not before then, or otherwise at one of our future webinars. So thanks very much for joining us. It's been a really insightful hour.